Before we start, make sure you have watched the part 1 and 2 for better understanding, because we are continuing from part 2, and also don't forget to comment the country you are watching from. So let's start. The morning I left my village felt surreal. The sun was rising over the fields, casting golden light over the land I had known all my life. My family stood at the edge of the dirt road, watching me leave. My mother, tears glistening in her eyes, stood by my father, who wore an expression of quiet pride. "Go, my daughter," my mother said softly. "Find your happiness. Live the life you've always dreamed of." My father, for once, said nothing. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder and nodded. It was his way of saying goodbye, of releasing me to the future I had chosen. I had never thought I would see the day when he would allow me to leave without protest. But here we were, standing at the threshold of a new chapter. I felt a pang of sadness, of course. Leaving the village, my home, was not easy. But I also felt an overwhelming sense of excitement. For the first time, I was no longer just reacting to the expectations and pressures around me. I was stepping into the unknown, embracing the opportunity to create my own life, independent of the people who had tried to shape it for me. The bus to the city was packed with people, their faces a mix of hope and uncertainty. I sat in the corner, my heart racing as we bumped along the road, heading toward the city that was now my new home. The city, vibrant, bustling, chaotic, was everything my village had never been. It was both exciting and intimidating, a place where I could be anyone, do anything, but also a place where I could get lost in the crowd. When the bus finally pulled into the city, I felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. The buildings towered above me, the streets teemed with people, and the noise was deafening. It was a world so different from my quiet village, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same. I had no plan beyond this moment. I had no job waiting, no place to stay, no friends to turn to. But I had something that was more important than all of that. Courage. I had the courage to take the first step into a life that was entirely mine to shape. I made my way to a small, inexpensive hostel in the heart of the city. The room was basic, a single bed, a desk, and a window that overlooked a busy street. But it was mine. It was a space where I could breathe, think, and begin to figure out what came next. The first few weeks in the city were a blur of new experiences and challenges. I searched for work, attended interviews, and slowly began to adapt to the rhythm of urban life. I met people from all walks of life, artists, entrepreneurs, students, and I found myself in conversations that made me realize how small my world had once been. The city was a place of endless opportunity, and I knew that if I worked hard enough, I could carve out my place here. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned if I had made the right decision. The loneliness at times was overwhelming, and there were days when I missed the simplicity of the village. But then, I would remind myself of why I had come here. I had left the village not because I didn't love my family, but because I needed to grow, to find my own path, to make my own choices. One evening, as I sat in a small cafe, sipping coffee and watching the world rush by, I met someone who would change everything. His name was Samuel, a writer and activist who had been in the city for years. He was passionate about social issues, about creating change in the world, and he saw the world through a lens of possibility. We spoke for hours, and I found myself drawn to his vision of the world, a vision where people were free to pursue their dreams, no matter the obstacles. "I see something in you, Lami," Samuel said, his eyes thoughtful. "You have a fire inside you. You've been through so much already, but I think you're just beginning to realize how much power you really have." His words resonated deeply within me. In the village, I had been told what to do, who to be, how to live. But in the city, Samuel saw me for who I was becoming, not as a daughter, not as a village girl, but as a woman with her own potential, her own future to shape. Over the next few months, Samuel became a mentor to me. He introduced me to people who were making a difference in the world, activists, leaders, and thinkers who had found their voice and were using it to create change. Through him, I began to see how I could take my own experiences, the pain, the struggles, the journey, and turn them into something meaningful. I enrolled in a local university, deciding to study social sciences. I had always been interested in the ways societies functioned, how change could be brought about, and how individuals like me could make a difference in the world. I realized that the future I had once dreamed of, the one I had been too afraid to reach for, was finally within my grasp. The days in the city quickly became weeks, and before I knew it, I had settled into a rhythm. My new life was far from perfect, but it was mine. I woke up early each day to attend university, where I threw myself into my studies, eager to learn and expand my understanding of the world. The excitement of being in a new environment, where I could explore ideas without fear of judgment or restraint, filled me with energy. Every class, every discussion, was a chance to uncover more about who I was and what I wanted to become. But it wasn't just academics that were shaping my new reality. I began to take on small freelance projects, using my writing skills to help local organizations tell their stories and advocate for social change. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and I soon found myself surrounded by a network of like-minded individuals. Young activists, artists, and entrepreneurs, who shared my desire to make a difference. Samuel continued to mentor me, his belief in me unwavering. He saw potential in me that I had yet to fully see in myself. Over time, his words became less about advice and more about encouragement, urging me to take risks, to step outside of my comfort zone, and to embrace the power of my own voice. One afternoon, while I was working on a project for a local nonprofit, I had a breakthrough moment. I was writing a report about the impact of education on impoverished communities, and as I pieced together the statistics and personal stories, it hit me, this was what I was meant to do. This was my purpose. For years, I had been focused on escaping my past, running from a life that I thought was constraining me. But now, I understood that my past wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was the foundation of my future. My experiences, the struggles, the sacrifices, the lessons, had all shaped who I was becoming. I wasn't just living for myself anymore. I had a mission, to advocate for the voiceless, to amplify the stories of those who had been overlooked, and to help create a world where people like me could live freely, authentically, and with purpose. I couldn't believe how much I had grown in such a short time. From the girl who had been forced into a life she didn't choose, to the woman who now stood on the precipice of a future filled with possibility. It was a journey of self-discovery, but also one of self-empowerment. The girl who had been silenced was now finding her voice. That evening, I sat down with Samuel at the small cafe where we often met to talk. He was always encouraging, always pushing me to believe in myself, but tonight, he seemed particularly proud. "You've come a long way, Lami," he said, his eyes gleaming with approval. "You're starting to see the world not just as a place to survive, but as a place to thrive. You're building something powerful, and you're doing it for the right reasons." His words warmed me, but I still had doubts. "I'm not sure I'm ready," I confessed. "I've been so focused on surviving, on getting by, that I don't know if I'm ready to take on something bigger." Samuel leaned forward, his expression serious. "You've already taken on more than most. The question isn't whether you're ready, it's whether you're willing to take the leap. You have everything you need within you. You've lived through the worst, and you've come out stronger. Don't underestimate what you can do." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. I had already leaped once, when I left the village, when I chose to live my own life, and I had come out stronger for it. The next leap was not about leaving behind my past, but about stepping into the person I was meant to become. Months passed, and my life in the city continued to evolve. The projects I worked on grew larger in scale, and I began collaborating with more organizations focused on social justice, education, and community empowerment. But despite the success, I still felt a sense of urgency, as if there was more I needed to do, more I needed to give. I felt the pull of my village again. It wasn't a longing to return to the past, but a desire to make a real difference in the community I had come from. My experience there, the pain of being silenced and controlled, had opened my eyes to the injustices that existed in so many places, particularly in rural areas where voices like mine were often overlooked. I spoke to Samuel about it one evening, sharing my thoughts with him. I feel like I need to go back, but not in the way I left. I need to give back to the people who shaped me, to the village that made me who I am today. Samuel listened intently, his gaze steady. That's the next step, Lami. You've learned so much, and now it's time to put it to use. The world needs people like you, people who understand both sides, who have lived the struggles and now have the knowledge and the drive to make a real difference. Don't let fear hold you back. Go back with purpose, with the intention to heal and build, not just for yourself but for the future of others. His words hit me deeply. It was clear now, my journey wasn't just about finding my own freedom. It was about creating the space for others to find theirs as well. The pain, the trauma, the struggles I had endured were not just mine. They were shared by countless others who had been silenced, dismissed, and forced to live lives that were never truly their own. I spent the next few weeks planning my return. This time, I wasn't running away. I was going back with the knowledge and skills I had gained, with the purpose of empowering others to live their truth. I reached out to local organizations, gathered information about the challenges the village faced, and began organizing initiatives focused on education, self-empowerment, and economic independence. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and that there would be resistance, but I was ready. When I finally returned to the village, it was with a sense of peace and purpose. I was no longer the scared girl who had run away. I was a woman who had found her voice, who had the tools and the determination to create change. My parents, though surprised by my decision, supported me. They saw the fire in me, the same fire they had tried to suppress, and they respected my determination to make a difference. I worked with the community, organizing workshops, creating opportunities for young women to gain the skills they needed to thrive, and partnering with local businesses to promote sustainable development. The work was slow, but every small victory was a reminder of why I had come back. The village was not a place of suffocating control anymore, it was a place of hope, of possibility. As months passed, the work I had started in the village began to grow. What started as small workshops for young women quickly transformed into a broader community initiative. More and more people came forward, eager to learn and contribute, and the village that had once felt so stifling became a place of energy and possibility. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but the ripple effect was real. I began to see change in the people around me. Women who had once been quiet, withdrawn, and resigned to the limitations of their circumstances were now standing up, sharing their stories, and pushing back against the traditional norms that had kept them in the shadows. It was powerful to witness. These were the same women who had been invisible in the village, who had lived under the weight of cultural expectations, now reclaiming their voices and their futures. One afternoon, as I was walking through the village with Ifeoma, who had been a constant support in my journey, we came across a group of women sitting by the well. They were talking animatedly, their voices filled with laughter and excitement. For a moment, I felt like I was watching the future unfold before me. These women, once silent and invisible, were now speaking freely, sharing ideas, and imagining new possibilities for their lives. "Look at them," Ifeoma said, her voice filled with awe. "This is what you've done, Lami. You've given them a chance to see the power they hold." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. It wasn't just my work, it was the work of every woman in the village who had decided to step up, to break free of the chains that had bound them for so long. It was a collective effort, and it was growing stronger every day. But there were still challenges. There were still people in the village who resisted the changes I was trying to implement. Some of the older men and women were skeptical, afraid of what this new wave of empowerment meant for the traditional order of things. I could feel their judgment when I walked through the village, the whispers behind my back. Some still saw me as the girl who had defied her family, who had left to seek a life beyond the village. One day, I found myself face to face with one of the most vocal critics, an elder who had always been a figure of authority in the village. He approached me as I was leaving the community center, his expression stern, his eyes filled with the weight of tradition. "You think you can change everything, Lami?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "You've brought ideas from the outside, ideas that will disrupt our way of life. What do you know about our struggles, about the sacrifices that have been made for generations? You are young and idealistic. You do not understand the complexities of our traditions." I stood there, taking in his words. There was no denying that the tradition of the village had shaped who I was, had shaped my parents, and many others. I had not come back to destroy it, but to challenge the parts of it that held people back from living their full potential. There was a difference between honoring the past and being trapped by it. "I understand more than you think," I said calmly. "I've lived here, grown up here. I know the struggles. But I also know that change is inevitable. And it's not about abandoning our culture, it's about allowing it to evolve, to adapt, to make space for people who have been left behind. We can hold on to our traditions, but we must also make room for progress. We must ensure that the future includes everyone." The elder looked at me, his gaze sharp, as if trying to determine whether I truly understood what I was saying. He said nothing for a long moment, but then, almost reluctantly, he nodded. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "there is some truth in your words. But be careful. Change is not always easy. It brings its own costs." "I understand," I replied, "and I'm ready to face those costs. But I believe it's worth it." As I walked away from the conversation, I felt a sense of satisfaction. The resistance I faced wasn't unexpected, and it wasn't personal. It was the natural pushback that occurs when a society begins to evolve. Change never comes without its challenges, but I was beginning to realize that it was worth fighting for. I wasn't just challenging tradition, I was fighting for the right of every person in the village to live a life of choice, to have the opportunity to determine their own future. As the years passed, the village transformed in ways I had never imagined. The programs I had started had grown, and new leaders emerged, leaders who had once been silenced but now spoke with confidence and authority. The younger generations, who had been raised with the knowledge that they had the right to dream and to pursue their passions, were the ones who would continue the work I had begun. One afternoon, as I was walking through the village, I came across a group of young women standing together, laughing and talking about their future plans. They were discussing ideas for a new business venture, one that would empower local women to start their own small businesses. The thought that these young women, some of whom had once been too afraid to speak, were now taking charge of their own futures filled me with pride. As I approached them, one of the young women turned to me and smiled. "Lami," she said, "we've been talking about starting a cooperative to help women here learn new skills. We want to show them that there's more to life than just what's been expected of us. You've taught us that we have the power to shape our own futures." I was overwhelmed with emotion. These young women had become the leaders of tomorrow. They were carrying forward the vision of a future where everyone, regardless of gender or background, could build a life that was theirs to define. That evening, I stood by the village well, watching the sun set behind the hills. The same well where I had once stood, feeling trapped by expectations, by the weight of the life that had been chosen for me. Now, it was a place of renewal. I had come full circle, no longer the girl who had fled in search of freedom, but a woman who had returned to help others find their own. I had found my place, not just in the city or in the village, but in the world. My purpose was clear: to empower others, to create space for those who had been silenced, and to build a future where everyone could live with the freedom to choose their own path. The journey had been long, and at times, it had been painful. But as I looked around at the changes we had made, at the lives that had been touched, I knew it had all been worth it. The years that followed felt like a culmination of everything I had worked for. The projects, the community initiatives, the empowerment programs. Everything began to align in ways I had never anticipated. It wasn't just about the physical changes in the village or the social transformation that was taking place, it was about the shift in mindset, the deep-rooted belief that everyone had the right to create the life they desired. The younger generations of women, the ones who had once lived in the shadow of tradition, were now forging their own paths. They started businesses, pursued education, and led initiatives to improve the community. More importantly, they were teaching the next generation that they, too, had the power to decide their futures. The circle of change I had started was growing wider, and it felt like the village had finally begun to breathe in the way it was always meant to. One afternoon, as I sat with a group of these young women, one of them turned to me and said, "Lami, we can't thank you enough for everything you've done. You gave us the courage to believe in ourselves. But now, it's our turn to lead." Her words sent a wave of pride through me. This was the moment I had been working toward, the moment when the next generation took up the mantle and carried it forward. I didn't need to be the one leading anymore. My role was to pass the torch, to make sure the flame I had ignited would never go out. But there was still much work to be done. As the village grew and developed, there were new challenges to face. There were still people who clung to the old ways, people who feared the changes that were taking place, and there were external factors, economic challenges, political shifts, and environmental issues, that threatened the progress we had made. I knew that the work I had started was far from complete. There were obstacles that could set us back, but I also knew that the foundation we had built was strong. We had shown that change was possible, that a community could transform itself from the inside out, and that the power of collective action could create a future of endless possibilities. I decided to start a new initiative, one that would link the village to the broader world beyond. The city had given me so much, and now I wanted to bring some of that knowledge, those connections, and that opportunity back to my community. I reached out to organizations, businesses, and universities to create partnerships that would provide resources, training, and exposure for the village's projects. The goal was simple: to connect the village to the outside world in a way that didn't diminish its identity but instead showcased its potential. I knew that this would be difficult. It would take time, effort, and cooperation from everyone involved. But I was determined to see it through. And as I watched the young women in the village take charge of their lives, taking the opportunities one had helped provide and turning them into something greater, I knew that I wasn't just helping them. I was helping the future of the entire village. One evening, as I walked through the village after a long day of meetings and planning, I passed by the old well where I had stood many years ago. The place that had once felt like a symbol of my confinement, the place where I had silently vowed to escape, now felt different. It was no longer just a well, it was a symbol of resilience, of growth, of the journey I had made. As I approached, I noticed a group of children playing near the well, their laughter echoing in the air. The joy in their voices was infectious, and I found myself stopping to watch them. They were carefree, unburdened by the expectations that had once weighed so heavily on my own shoulders. They were running, laughing, and dreaming, free to imagine a future that was limitless. A small boy came up to me, his face shining with excitement. "Lami, come play with us. We're pretending to be explorers, finding new lands." I smiled, crouching down to his level. "Explorers, huh? What are you going to discover?" "We're going to find the hidden treasure," he said, his eyes sparkling. "We're going to build a new world." His words were simple, but they struck a deep chord within me. This was it, the future I had been fighting for, the one I had worked so hard to create. A future where these children would grow up knowing that they had the power to shape the world around them. A future where they wouldn't be confined by the walls of tradition, but encouraged to explore, to dream, and to create. As I watched them run off, their imaginations leading them to places I could only dream of as a child, I realized something: the change I had fought for was no longer just a vision. It was alive in these children, in the women who had found their voices, in the community that was learning to stand together. It was a legacy I had helped create, but it was also one that would continue long after I was gone. The village was no longer the place I had left, it was something new, something better. It was a place of possibilities, of growth, of hope. Years passed, and I continued my work, balancing my life in the village with my broader efforts to connect the community to the world beyond. I continued to build relationships with organizations, to offer mentorship to the younger generations, and to advocate for the village in ways that felt meaningful. Every time I returned to the city or worked on a new project, I saw the progress that had been made in the village, and it filled me with pride. One day, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference about social change and community empowerment. As I stood at the podium, speaking about the work we had done in my village, I looked out over the crowd and realized that everything I had fought for had brought me to this moment. It wasn't about me anymore, it was about the collective effort of everyone involved. The village, the community, the young women, the children, it was their future that I had helped shape. And now, it was their turn to lead. I spoke about the importance of giving people the tools to change their own lives, of empowering them to think critically and act purposefully. I spoke about the village that had been transformed, the young women who had become leaders, the children who now had a world of possibilities in front of them. As I finished my speech, the applause that followed wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. For everyone who had been part of this journey. And as I stepped down from the stage, I felt a sense of fulfillment that went deeper than any personal achievement. I had come full circle. From the girl who had been forced to live a life she didn't choose, to the woman who had reclaimed her future and used it to create change for others. My journey was not just mine, it was a shared journey, one that would continue with every generation that followed. As the years unfolded, I became more deeply embedded in the life of the village. It was no longer just my project, my initiative. It had become a living, breathing entity. The village had evolved beyond what I had imagined when I first returned. New ideas flourished, the spirit of entrepreneurship blossomed, and young people were no longer seeing themselves as confined to the narrow paths laid out for them by tradition. They were branching out, exploring, and creating opportunities for themselves and others. In one of the most defining moments of my life, I was asked to be part of a government committee focused on rural development, an initiative to bring more resources and opportunities to rural communities like mine. This was a significant achievement, not just for me, but for the village. It marked the moment when the village's growth was no longer something small and contained, but something larger than all of us. Our model of change, of empowerment and community-driven development, had caught the attention of the outside world. Yet, despite this recognition, I never lost sight of what had initially brought me back. The core of my mission was not just about achieving recognition or accolades, it was about ensuring that the future of the village, and of people like me, remained in the hands of those who had been overlooked, suppressed, and marginalized for so long. On the day of the committee meeting, as I sat around a large table with government officials, entrepreneurs, and advocates, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come, and how far the village had come with me. The young women who had once sat in the back of the room, quiet and hesitant, were now leading conversations, proposing solutions, and asserting themselves as equals in this space. Their voices, once silenced by centuries of tradition, had become a force for change. I shared the stage with them now, each of us, in our own way, a symbol of the transformation we had witnessed. After the meeting, as I walked back to my office, I took a moment to pause. For the first time, I felt like I could fully appreciate the journey we had all been on. My journey had begun as a personal escape, but it had turned into a shared mission. The village wasn't just my past, it was now part of the future we were all building together. That evening, as I stood in the village square, watching the sun set over the hills, I felt the same peace that had filled me years ago when I returned. The village was no longer the place I had left, but something new, something that belonged to all of us. And I knew, as I looked out over the people who had been part of this transformation, that the future was not just something I was helping to create, it was something that was already taking root. Years later, long after I had moved forward with my work in the city, I returned to the village one final time. I had spent much of my life balancing the demands of the city and the village, working to bridge the gap between the two worlds that had shaped me. But now, it was time to pass on the leadership to the next generation, the young women who had grown into powerful voices for change. The sun hung low in the sky as I stood at the village's center, watching the familiar faces of the people I had worked with, the children who had grown up in the new world we had created. They were no longer the children who had played by the well, unaware of the limits placed on them. They were now young adults, leaders in their own right, carving out their own futures. One of the young women, Amina, who had been one of the first to step into leadership, approached me. She had become the village's first female business owner, and her success was a testament to the collective effort we had all made. "You've changed everything, Lami," she said with a smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You gave us the tools to dream, to build, and to believe in our own power. We are who we are because you dared to lead the way." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. "No, Amina. You've always had the power. I just helped you see it." And in that moment, I understood something profound. The legacy I had hoped to leave was not about my name, not about the work I had done. It was about what had been passed on, the empowerment, the sense of self-worth, and the courage to claim a future of one's own making. It wasn't about what I had accomplished, it was about what the next generation would continue to accomplish. As I stood with Amina and the other young leaders, I felt a sense of fulfillment I had never imagined. My journey had come full circle. I had left the village as a young woman seeking freedom. I had returned as a woman determined to create change. And now, I was leaving it, knowing that it would continue to grow, to change, and to flourish long after I was gone. The village had become more than just a place on a map, it had become a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of collective action. It was no longer just a place where I had been shaped by tradition, it was a place where the future had been shaped by all of us, together. As I walked away, the sound of children's laughter echoed in the distance. The next generation, the ones who would continue this journey, would carry the torch forward, lighting the way for others to follow. And as I looked back, I realized that the true legacy of the village was not in the work I had done, it was in the lives that had been transformed, the dreams that had been realized, and the future that had been built for all. Final moral of the story. This final part encapsulates the ultimate lesson of the protagonist's journey. The true measure of success is not an individual achievement, but in the legacy we leave behind and the ways in which we empower others to create their own futures. It's about breaking the cycle of limitation and providing others with the tools to find their own voice, pursue their own dreams, and build a life that is true to who they are. The story teaches that change is not a solitary endeavor, it is a collective force, driven by collaboration, understanding, and shared purpose. The protagonist's legacy is not in her own accomplishments but in the empowerment of those around her, in the creation of a future that will continue to thrive long after her influence has passed. True legacy is built not just by what we achieve, but by how we help others achieve their own dreams. The village had become more than just a place on a map, it had become a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of collective action. It was no longer just a place where I had been shaped by tradition, it was a place where the future had been shaped by all of us, together. As I walked away, the sound of children's laughter echoed in the distance. The next generation, the ones who would continue this journey, would carry the torch forward, lighting the way for others to follow. And as I looked back, I realized that the true legacy of the village was not in the work I had done, it was in the lives that had been transformed, the dreams that had been realized, and the future that had been built for all. Final moral of the story. This final part encapsulates the ultimate lesson of the protagonist's journey. The true measure of success is not an individual achievement, but in the legacy we leave behind and the ways in which we empower others to create their own futures. It's about breaking the cycle of limitation and providing others with the tools to find their own voice, pursue their own dreams, and build a life that is true to who they are. The story teaches that change is not a solitary endeavor, it is a collective force, driven by collaboration, understanding, and shared purpose. The protagonist's legacy is not in her own accomplishments but in the empowerment of those around her, in the creation of a future that will continue to thrive long after her influence has passed. True legacy is built not just by what we achieve, but by how we help others achieve their own dreams. Lessons for parents. As I continued my work in the village and beyond, one thing became clear, the journey I had taken, leaving the village, fighting for my freedom, and ultimately returning to help empower others, was not just about personal growth. It was also a story about the role parents play in shaping their children's futures. The lessons I learned from my own parents, as well as the way I began to shape the futures of young people in the village, also carried powerful lessons for parents everywhere. Throughout my experience, I had come to understand that parents often have the best of intentions for their children. My parents had wanted to protect me, to ensure my future was secure, but in doing so, they inadvertently stifled my ability to live my own life. They had tried to shape my path without realizing that the greatest gift they could give me was the freedom to choose my own journey. I could see the same struggles unfolding in the lives of many of the young women and men I worked with. Some of them were still trapped in the expectations set by their parents, expectations that did not align with their true passions and potential. These young people were beginning to find their own voices, but the process was often fraught with pain and resistance. The weight of familial duty, the pressure to uphold tradition, and the fear of disappointing their parents often created a barrier between the dreams they had and the reality they could create. But in talking to these young people, I began to see something else, the shift that was happening in how parents, especially those who had lived through the transformative period I had, were starting to see their children. They were beginning to understand that their children's happiness and success did not have to look like their own. Their children's dreams did not have to be confined to the same paths they had followed. I started to have conversations with the parents in the village, those who had raised children who were now pursuing careers and dreams that defied tradition. These conversations were eye-opening, not just for me but for them as well. One evening, after a meeting at the community center, I sat down with a group of parents, including my own mother. They had asked to speak with me about the changes happening in the village and how they could better support their children's growth. "My daughter is doing well now," one father said, his voice hesitant. "But I still worry. She is working in a field that is new to us. I don't know if I can trust that she'll find security." I could hear the worry in his voice, and I understood it. As parents, we often fear the unknown for our children. We want to protect them from failure, from hardship. But in doing so, we sometimes forget that failure and hardship are parts of life that our children must navigate on their own. They need to learn, to stumble, to rise again, just as we did. I spoke to them with honesty, drawing from my own experience. "I understand your concerns," I said, "but security doesn't come from following someone else's path. It comes from knowing your own worth, your own passions, and having the courage to follow them. The world has changed, and so must the way we look at success. It's no longer about just having a job, it's about finding a purpose that drives you, something that fills you with joy and determination." My mother, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "I used to think that I was doing what was best for you by guiding your every step. But I see now that I was holding you back, not allowing you to explore the world on your own terms. It wasn't because I didn't love you, it was because I feared for you. I didn't want you to suffer the way I did." Her words touched me deeply. I could see the weight of the realization in her eyes, the realization that love sometimes means letting go, even when it's hard. I looked around at the parents, and I saw something shift in their expressions. "You don't have to let go of your love," I continued. "But you do have to let go of the need to control every aspect of your child's journey. Your children will find their own way. And in doing so, they will make their own mistakes, but they will also find their own strength. Your role as a parent is to support them, to provide a foundation of love, wisdom, and encouragement. Let them explore the world, let them fall, and let them rise on their own." The room was quiet for a moment. And then, one by one, the parents began to nod, some of them with tears in their eyes. They understood, not just in their minds, but in their hearts. This was the shift that needed to happen, not just in the village, but in the way we all viewed the role of parents. The lessons for parents. Support, don't control. Parents often want to protect their children by controlling the choices they make. However, true support means letting your children make their own decisions, even when those decisions are not what you expected or hoped for. Trust that they will learn from their experiences, both the good and the bad, and grow stronger because of them. Empowerment over protection. Protecting your children from failure can be a form of disempowerment. By shielding them from every hardship, you may unknowingly rob them of the chance to build resilience and independence. Allow your children to take risks and face challenges. Empower them to navigate life's ups and downs on their own terms. Embrace change. The world is constantly evolving, and so are the paths to success. The dreams and careers that were once secure may no longer hold the same weight. Be open to the idea that success looks different today, and encourage your children to pursue their passions, even if those passions are not what you expected or what tradition dictates. Encourage exploration. The greatest gift a parent can give a child is the freedom to explore who they are and what they want to become. This exploration is crucial for self-discovery. If a child can experiment, make mistakes, and learn independently, they will grow into a person who knows their own worth and can navigate life with confidence. Love unconditionally, without conditions. Loving your children unconditionally means loving them for who they are, not for the life you want them to live. It means being proud of their individuality and the choices they make, even when those choices are different from your own. The power of letting go. Parents who hold on too tightly to their children's futures may unintentionally cause them to feel trapped, leading them to question their own path. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning your child, it means giving them space to grow and discover the world on their own. Be a guide, not a director. Parents are the guides who help children find their way, not the directors who dictate every move. Offer wisdom, advice, and encouragement, but trust that your children will navigate their own journey. Your role is to provide the foundation, not to write the script. Conclusion: a future built together. As I stood in the village one last time, watching the children play and the women working together, I realized that the legacy I had worked so hard to build wasn't just mine. It was a collective effort, an effort that included not just the young women and men of the village, but the parents who had come to see their role in a new light. Together, we had created something meaningful, a future where everyone had the opportunity to thrive, to dream, and to create their own path. The journey had been long, and it had been full of challenges. But through it all, the lessons I had learned along the way had shaped not just my future, but the future of my community. And I knew that, as time went on, the next generation would continue to build upon the foundation we had laid. This was the true legacy of change, one that was not just about me, but about all of us, working together to create a world where freedom, opportunity, and empowerment were available to everyone, no matter their background or circumstances. The future was bright, and it belonged to all of us. The story have come to the end. Don't forget to tell us in the comments section where you are watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.